Welcome to Tales from the Trenches, Season 4. Today, it is my absolute honor to have Mike Todd with me.
Here's a story of a fundraiser who was launching his very own web show. Each episode is very short due to edits, so it can really flow. Here's a story of a podcast guest star who was busy raising money of their own. They were each great in their own way, fundraising in his own. Till the one day when Jack asked a guest to join him, and they knew it was much more than a jest, that these guests must somehow form a resource. That's the way they all became the podcast guests. The podcast guests. The podcast guests. That's the way they became the podcast guests.
Mike Todd is a seasoned professional with extensive experience in both wealth management and philanthropy. He likes to say that he's worked on Bay Street and Hastings Street. His passion for spreading the magic of generosity is evident in his work, most recently demonstrated by his launch of Transform Philanthropy. At Transform Philanthropy, Mike dedicates his efforts to helping donors, wealth advisors, and charities with optimizing the giving, stewarding, and receiving of philanthropic capital. He's an expert in leveraging the advantages of donor-advised funds, and he's committed to facilitating strategic and impactful philanthropic initiatives by encouraging strategic giving. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much, Jack. Happy to be here.
And so with the donor-advised funds, I find oftentimes people are in silos, right? So there's your financial advisor, there's your accountant, there's your lawyer. Every now and then you might have someone who puts all of those folks together, and that's obviously the dream team. But far too often, the donor or client doesn't want this one to know this. They've kind of segregated everything. And at the end of the day, it proves to be a disservice to the donor or client because they aren't being strategic about it and looking at it holistically, like at the 20,000 foot level. I remember years ago, I asked a donor and I explained how he could give $1 million and how it was going to help him. And his accountant was there and he looked at the guy and he goes, how come you didn't tell me I could have done this years ago? And it's because he didn't disclose all of the, pieces of the pie. So how do you work to kind of get that holistic approach and that team approach as opposed to, the lawyer, financial planner, accountant, and whatever else kind of going?
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think there was a time when that was much more likely to be the case, where clients withheld information from different parties who may or may not actually be physically sitting at the same table, but they're all involved in the client's finances. I do see now, though, and you used the word, Jack, holistic. I do see that the wealth business is becoming more holistic. And coming along with that, I believe, are the accountants and new estate planners and lawyers. It's happening. They may not all be moving in lockstep, but I think they're all marching in the same direction towards a more holistic view. Because the clients, as I said, have a more holistic view of their wealth, in its entirety, and what they hope to achieve with it. So I do believe that that's changing, and especially with the relatively new role of a philanthropic advisor, they have the opportunity to literally get everybody at the table and talk, and everybody's working towards the best interests of the client. And in this case, what's best for the client is that they feel like they're getting effective impact from their philanthropic giving. So it is changing, but it's it's an evolution, that's for sure.
And how many clients would you say kind of involve that next gen, right? As you're getting up there in years, I'll never forget, I was friendly with Charles Bronfman, and he wound up his foundation, the Andrea and Charles Bronfman Foundation. Why? Not because wasn't doing anything. As a matter of fact, he endowed the projects that he was working on. He just said his kids had other philanthropic interests. He was tickled pink that they were doing something philanthropic, and he said, I didn't want to kind of dictate from the grave per se and say, you got to follow my priorities. He says, as long as they're giving, he was thrilled, and they each have their own priorities. So how many, those clients bring in that next gen to start talking about what's important and what isn't?
Oh, I love that story. That's so encouraging because often that same thing happens where the next gen has different interests and it doesn't go over well. And, the private foundation ends up getting, blows up. And I've seen that more than once. So I love your story. I think now, again, with the evolution of people's view of wealth, I have to believe that that's happening less, or it's happening with the encouragement of the older generation saying, listen, I know that your causes are not mine. We've got the capital here for you, but let's talk about what you want to happen with it because you're taking over. So I do see that happening more, but it's really fascinating. You still hear the stories of tragedy and upset within a family when they don't necessarily feel the same way about particular causes, and you do hear of stories like that. But I think the ones who are embracing this as capital that is available to make a change in the world. I have my interests. My kids may have different interests, but I see more and more older generations encouraging that of the younger. Your question about how many of them are brought into the fold? I still think that's unfolding as we speak. Some folks like to keep things close to the vest. Some would like to believe that the next generation will just take over and keep doing exactly what the parents did. But that's changing, as I said, and as we've all heard about the wealth transfer. As that continues to happen, I think more and more people are realizing that this is a powerful tool, but it may be in service of something that's important to my kids, not necessarily to me. So it's an evolution, like a lot of what we've been talking about.
Yeah. So talk to me about bequests. I'm always
Mm.
fascinated with bequests. And one of the things that fascinates me is the major donors, while they may give while they're alive, 100,000, 200,000, even annually, they tend not to leave a substantial amount in their estate to charity. Yet the average person, talk about like a school teacher, as a percentage, they actually are leaving a greater percentage to charity. So have A, of you come across that? And B, any idea why that is?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think at the risk of always answering your questions with "It's getting better," I think it is getting better. Um, I think more people well, a couple of things are happening. More astute accountants and lawyers are involved, and they're pointing out the absolute benefit to the estate of leaving a sizable gift to charity at the time. So we're seeing that taking place more as an estate planning mechanism, and I believe that that's going to increase, especially as some of these numbers get rather large. I mean, there's only so much that the next generation needs, and I've had a lot of great conversations with wealthy individuals who just are horrified by the concept of their kids getting too much. So we are seeing more and more of that, and as I said, it's becoming more of a powerful estate planning tool, as well as a way to leave a legacy. It's that age old question though: do I give now or do I wait upon death? And I think the true answer, or the most appropriate answer for a lot of people, is I'm going to do a little bit of both. And I'm probably going to end up with more money than I think I'm going to. So I have to make sure that that's planned for as well.
Hmm. Hmm. And so, does a DAF come into an estate planning as a mechanism for either life insurance to be put into it, or a charitable remainder trust, or any of those kind of more complicated financial mechanisms?
It does. I think a DAF is actually a fantastic estate planning tool. That's relatively new thinking, though, and so I don't think that that's crossed the minds of a lot of people involved. I shudder every once in a while. We read in the paper a horror story about a will and an estate and a fight, and the donor changed his mind but didn't quite get the will changed before he passed, and it's terrible. I hate to see that because it paints with a very broad and negative brush. I point out to people that instead of naming individual charities in my will, And let's say one of them folds. Let's say I have a change of heart. I generated a new interest and I want to go over here now. And I have to get my will rewritten, and my lawyer doesn't want to nickel and dime me with fees, but they have to do what they have to do. Instead, what I'm going to do is name my DAF in my will as the beneficiary of all my charitable dollars. And that's it. And I'll never have to change that. And then as I know who I want that money to actually go to as far as operating charities, I let the DAF administrators know, here's my plans. Giving them a written list. I want this much money to go to these charities, either immediately or over time or whatever the case is. Very, very flexible. And I mean, the DAF administrator would hate this, but I can change my mind once a week if I want, and just let them know there's no will to be rewritten, and my
Right.
plans are always lock solid there. So I I I often talk about this as a fantastic way to plan your estate, and avoid some of those tragic stories that we hear about from time to time. That's starting to happen. I'm starting to see more of that.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting in the fundraising world. I hate the term major gifts. It's just I
There's no minor gifts,
and
right?
well, that's it. And part of the reason is because I did capital campaign consulting for many years, and I would do church fundraising, and a major gift there was $5,000 over 5 years. Where I was at a hospital, and it was 25,000 over 5 years. Right? It's the same major gift title that's there. But I think that a lot of times folks are also hesitant rather to open up a DAF because they think you need to have $1 million in there to start with. And I know even community foundations vary as to how much you need to open up your own fund within the foundation. So talk to me about how those minimums kind of work with DAFs outside of community foundations, of
Sure.
course.
Yeah. Well, community foundations definitely because they've been around for so long. Some of the more established independent DAFs would have like a 10,000, a 20,000. There's one with $250,000 minimum. So they're out there. But thankfully, we're also seeing in Canada slowly but surely uh, digital DAFs popping up. And in some cases, you can open it with 20 bucks. You just pull out your credit card, set up an online account, put 20 bucks in off your credit card, and there it is. It's sitting there. It's a DAF. That money will not be invested over time, but it's still a digital giving account for you to use. I tell people now, listen, if you write 2 checks a year for $50 each, I think you should still open up a DAF this way. If nothing else, you're going to get one tax receipt. So you have less chance of losing it. But I do believe that we're seeing the minimums drop down. Even some of the larger, more established independent DAFs that may or may not have any digital aspect to them are slowly lowering their minimums because they're seeing that the democratization of the DAF is a term we often hear is beneficial for charity, and that's what it's all about. It's just a question of balancing off the work involved, and I think that's why having a digital DAF and having more and more of them becoming platform based makes more sense. Opportunity costs are lower, and you can get started for much less.
And so I assume there's minimums at different DAFs for you to advise how to get it invested, right? So for $100, I'm not going to tell you to, invest in companies A, B, and C. To have that privilege, you have to have a minimum threshold would be my guess. Yes.
Yes, and that's where it gets very dependent on who is providing the investment advice. Often some DAFs, often community foundations have their own investment management. So yes, your assets will be invested, but you don't have much say, if any, in how. Other places will let you bring your trusted advisor, as I said earlier, and you and your advisor can have conversations about how this is invested. The DAF itself will have an investment policy statement. Some of them are rather narrow, some of them are very, very broad. So it really depends. It's kind of DAF specific at this point as to what you can do. But and of course you also have the minimums that my investment advisor might have at his firm. So you've got to trade off all of these flexible aspects of it.
Hmm. Hmm. And so many times I always find that some folks are hesitant to look at these DAFs because they're afraid of fees. Um, and uh, and so I know that at community foundations, there's fees, but it's also graduated because it's based on a percentage. And if you have $10 million, a small little percentage is a lot more than if you have $100,000. So talk to me a bit
Sure.
about the fees and how you get over that bugaboo with clients or
Sure.
donors.
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, my answer is going to be it depends. But the reality is there's generally two fees. One would be a fee for the investment management, and then one would be an administration fee for the DAF itself, for the foundation operating the DAF. There's a couple different conversations in there. The fees from the DAFs generally are low and getting lower. They're trying to cover their costs. They're not necessarily trying to make money doing this. They just want to make sure that it's not costing them a lot of money to operate a DAF. So I've seen numbers from 0.5% to 1.5%. Definitely graduated in a lot of cases. And then on the investment management side, again, depending on who's managing the investment, you may have some input into that. If I'm working with my advisor and I have achieved a relatively low fee structure on all my investments with them, they're going to extend that to me on the DAF as well. Very, very likely. I know it's not legally my money, but they're going to pretend it's my money as far as billing is concerned. So it's very flexible. The community foundations, because especially the ones where they've contracted out the investment management to a single firm or a group of firms, they generally have very low investment costs because it's a big, big pool and it's all being managed at once. So you do definitely have to check, but I don't think I've ever seen anything that's caused me to raise my eyebrows because quite frankly now there's enough competition that you wouldn't survive very long if you were the high cost provider.
Mike, this has been a great eye opener for me. I certainly learned a lot. Hopefully, our listeners did as well. If folks wanted to get hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. Yeah. It's very simple. My email address is mike@transformphilanthropy.ca. Very simple. I kind of live on LinkedIn. You can find me there as well. Happy to chat. I tell people that I'm weirdly passionate about donor advised funds, so I will talk to anybody, anytime about any aspect of it or answer these questions. Yeah, I think it's really important work. I really do believe that, and so I'd be happy to connect with folks.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Mike.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on, Jack.